Everyone whispered when she walked into the courtroom that day. Her dress was simple, her face calm, but her eyes, those eyes held storms. She's losing everything, someone muttered. Poor thing, they didn't know that sometimes losing everything is the only way to start again. When the judge's gavel fell, her marriage of 15 years was officially over. Emma walked out without a tear. Her husband, Richard, smirked from across the room, already holding the hand of the woman he'd replaced her with. Outside, the cameras flashed. The gossip churned, and her so-called friends avoided eye contact. By nightfall, social media had turned her pain into entertainment. Asterisk, he traded her for someone half her age. She'd never recover. Asterisk. They laughed, but laughter has a strange way of echoing back. For weeks, Emma stayed quiet. Her house was empty, her savings gone, her name mocked. But in the silence, something inside her shifted. The pity she felt turned into anger, and that anger began to burn into determination. One evening, while packing the last of her boxes, she found her old sketchbook, the one she'd hidden away. Richard told her art was a waste of time. Her fingers trembled as she turned the pages. Dreams she'd buried came alive again, whispering, asterisk, start over, asterisk, so she did. The next morning, she sold her engagement ring, bought secondhand art supplies, and began painting in her tiny apartment. Each stroke carried a story, each color a wound healing. She didn't know it yet, but the world that mocked her was about to remember her name for reasons they'd never imagine. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet for someone the world had already forgotten. Emma's apartment smelled of turpentine and coffee, her fingers stained with paint instead of tears. She woke at sunrise, worked late into the night, and painted as if each brushstroke was her heartbeat. At first, no one cared. She posted her art online, no likes, no comments, just silence. But silence didn't scare her anymore. It motivated her. A month later, a small art page shared one of her pieces, titled asterisk after the storm, asterisk within hours. Her inbox filled with messages from strangers who saw their own pain in her colors. You painted what I feel, one woman wrote. That was the moment. Emma realized he wasn't just painting to heal, she was painting to connect. Meanwhile, Richard and his new wife were living the kind of life social media adored. Lavish trips, luxury dinners, endless smiles. But behind every perfect photo was a crack, one that would soon spread. His business began to falter. Rumors swirled about his financial trouble, and the woman he'd chosen for status started pulling away. Karma, Emma thought, didn't need help, it just needed time. One evening, an art gallery owner reached out. Your work has something raw real, he said. Would you consider a small exhibition? Emma froze. The same city that had mocked her divorce now wanted to display her resilience. The same people who pitied her would soon pay to see what she'd created. From the ashes they laughed at. She smiled faintly and whispered, let them look. I'm done hiding. The night before her first art exhibition, Emma stood alone in the gallery. The white walls glowed under soft lights, lined with paintings that told her story: grief, rage, rebirth. Each piece was a chapter of her silence turned into color. She ran her fingers along one of the frames and whispered, they'll see me now. The next evening, the crowd arrived: critics, collectors, even local reporters. She kept her composure, greeting strangers who praised her courage. But inside, her heart raced. Then she saw them, Richard and his new wife, standing by the door. Of course they came. Scandal always drew attention. Richard smiled awkwardly. Impressive, he muttered. Didn't think you had this in you. Emma met his gaze, calm and cold. You never did, she replied. Cameras flashed around them, capturing the moment. A woman nearby whispered, isn't that her ex-husband? The one who left her? And just like that, the whispers turned from pity to awe. The gallery buzzed with excitement. Offers poured in. A well-known magazine editor approached her and said, your story will inspire millions. We'd like to feature you. Emma smiled faintly. Then let's tell it right. As Richard left, His wife trailed behind, avoiding Emma's eyes. Outside, the night air was crisp, filled with the sounds of traffic and murmurs. Emma stepped out, looking up at the city lights. The same city that once laughed at her was now saying her name with admiration. She took a deep breath, feeling both lighter and stronger. Her revenge wasn't loud, it was beautifully silent, framed and hung for the world to see. In the weeks after the exhibition, Emma's life transformed faster than she could comprehend. Her art became the talk of the city. Magazines wanted her story. Collectors wanted her paintings. And people who once ignored her suddenly acted like they'd always believed in her. But Emma hadn't forgotten how they laughed, how they whispered. Success hadn't erased the pain. It had only reframed it. One evening, she returned home to find a letter waiting on her doorstep. No return address, just her name in familiar handwriting. Richard? She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a check for a large sum of money and a note. Asterisk, you deserve this. I owe you more than I can ever repay. Asterisk. Emma stared at it for a long moment, then tore the check in half. She didn't need his guilt, his charity, or his permission to feel whole. She had built herself from nothing. Later that night, she sat by her window, painting a new piece, one she'd call Asterisk the Phoenix. Asterisk. It was vibrant, full of golds and reds, the colors of transformation. When the piece was finished, she donated it to a women's shelter, anonymously. She wanted the message to spread. Asterisk. You can rise, even from ashes someone else left behind. Asterisk. A few days later, she received an email from a survivor who had seen the painting. Asterisk. Your art reminded me I'm not broken. Asterisk. It said. Emma smiled, realizing her healing had become contagious. Across town, Richard watched her success from afar, his empire fading while hers grew stronger. And for the first time, he understood she hadn't just survived without him. She had become everything he was too small to imagine. Months passed, and Emma's name had become synonymous with resilience. Her art hung in galleries from New York to London. Her interviews, filling glossy magazine pages that once belonged to people who had pitied her. But behind the recognition, she stayed humble, grounded in the memory of who she used to be, the woman no one believed in. One evening, she was invited to speak at a women's empowerment event. The audience was filled with professionals, artists, and dreamers who'd all faced their own heartbreaks. When she walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted in applause. I was once defined by what someone else took from me, she began. But the truth is, no one can take who you are, only what you let them own. The room fell silent, hanging on her every word. After the speech, a young woman approached her, tears in her eyes. My husband left me last month, she said. I don't know how to start again. Emma smiled softly and replied, start small, start scared, but start. The girl nodded, clutching Emma's hand as if she'd just been handed permission to live again. That night, Emma returned home, her heart full. She realized the greatest revenge wasn't success, it was the ability to turn pain into purpose. Across town, Richard watched her speech online. He couldn't look away. The woman he once tried to silence had become a voice for thousands. As applause echoed through his computer speakers, he whispered to himself, I destroyed the best thing I ever had. But by then, Emma's chapter had already closed, and hers was the story everyone wanted to read. A year after the divorce, Emma's world looked nothing like the one she'd left behind. Her calendar was full art shows, interviews, collaborations, but her soul was finally quiet. She had learned to find joy in the simplest things. Morning light on her studio walls, the scent of fresh paint, the laughter of the small team she'd built around her. Still, there were moments quiet, unexpected, when the past whispered. One day, she received an invitation to a charity gala hosted by one of the city's biggest art patrons. The same circle of people who had once mocked her would be there. Her instinct said to decline, but something deeper urged her to go, not for them, but for closure. The night of the gala, she arrived in an elegant black gown, confidence radiating like armor. As she stepped inside, conversations paused. People who had laughed at her now looked at her with awe. "That's Emma Harris," someone whispered. The artist. The same word that used to sound like an insult now carried power. Then she saw him, Richard. Alone, thinner, older, holding a drink he didn't seem to want. Their eyes met across the room. He gave a small nod, as if silently admitting defeat. Emma returned it with a calm smile. No words, no scene, just peace. Later that evening, as the event wrapped up, a young journalist approached her. "Your work changed how I see failure," she said. "Do you have any advice for those still lost?" Emma thought for a moment, then replied softly, "Don't try to rebuild what broke you. Build something new and make it beautiful." Her words lingered long after she left, echoing in a room that once belonged to her pain but now celebrated her power. The following months tested Emma in ways success never could. With recognition came expectations, press, investors, new projects that threatened to pull her back into the same chaos she'd once escaped. Everyone wanted a piece of her story, but no one wanted to understand its weight. "Tell us how you rebuilt," they'd ask. "Make it inspiring." Yet behind every headline, there was exhaustion, quiet nights, and moments of doubt. Sometimes she wondered if she was truly free from the shadows of her past or just living in brighter ones. One evening, as she sat in her studio surrounded by unfinished canvases, she received a message from an unknown number. Asterisk, "You don't know me, but your story saved me. I left my husband today. Thank you for giving me courage." Asterisk, Emma read it twice, then smiled through tears. Maybe that was her purpose, not fame, not revenge, but freedom, multiplied. The next day, she visited her hometown for the first time since her divorce. The streets were smaller, the people the same. Some avoided her eyes, others greeted her with awkward smiles. But when she walked into the old cafe where she used to meet Richard, something unexpected happened. The waitress, an older woman, looked up and said, "You're her, aren't you?" "The artist who paints about healing." Emma nodded. The woman smiled. "Your paintings hang here now. They give people hope." For a moment, Emma was speechless. She looked around the cafe, seeing her work displayed on the walls. Vivid blues and golds that once represented her pain, now lighting the room. "You turned your heartbreak into a home for others," the woman said softly. That night, Emma stood outside under the stars, feeling something deeper than pride, peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from no longer needing to prove anything. Across the city, Richard scrolled through his phone, seeing yet another article about her. The headline read, asterisk, "From broken to brave, how Emma Harris repainted her life, asterisk." He stared at her photo, her smile serene, her eyes untouchable. For the first time, he whispered not regret, but truth she was never mine to break. And somewhere, miles away, Emma exhaled, as if she'd heard him, and finally fully let go. Weeks turned into months, and Emma's story had taken on a life of its own. She was no longer just an artist, she was a symbol, a movement. Her paintings toured globally, and her words were quoted on podcasts and talk shows she'd never even heard of. Yet through all of it, she stayed the same woman who once painted in a cramped apartment with trembling hands. She still woke up early, still made her own coffee, still found beauty in quiet mornings. One night, while sorting through fan letters, she found one that stood out. No sender's name, no address, just a single sentence. Asterisk, "You taught me that endings aren't failures, they're freedom." Asterisk. It made her cry, not from sadness, but from pride. Every tear she'd once shed had grown roots and blossomed into something that helped others bloom. A few days later, she was invited to a television interview. The host smiled and asked, "If you could speak to the version of yourself from the day your marriage ended, what would you tell her?" Emma thought for a moment, then said, "I'd tell her that being broken isn't the end. It's the moment you start building something no one can destroy." Across the country, Richard watched the interview in silence. The woman on the screen was unrecognizable, strong, radiant, untouchable. His new relationship had already crumbled. His business was gone. The world he tried to control had dissolved in his hands. He realized that Emma hadn't just healed, she had transcended him. That night, Emma returned home to her studio. She painted until dawn. Her final piece of the collection, a canvas filled with light, hope, and quiet strength. She titled it ** Freedom Looks Like Me, **. And as the first rays of morning sun touched the paint, she knew her story wasn't about revenge or even resilience. It was about becoming whole again, one color at a time. A year later, Emma stood in a museum filled with her work. The walls shimmered with her color. What had begun in silence now spoke to thousands. The curator introduced her as the artist who turned heartbreak into history. As applause filled the room, Emma smiled, but her mind drifted back to the woman she once was, the one sitting on a courtroom bench. Well, the world laughed. That woman would never have believed she'd stand here now, unbroken. After the event, she slipped outside, escaping the noise for a breath of night air. The city glowed around her, alive and endless. She took a photo of the skyline, not to post, but to remember. This was her view, now limitless. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Emma, she turned. It was Richard. His hair was grayer, his eyes weary. I saw the exhibit, he said quietly. It's incredible, she nodded, offering a polite smile. Thank you. He hesitated. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. For a moment, Emma studied him, the man who once broke her into pieces. But all she felt was distance, peaceful, final distance. I'm proud of me too, she said softly, then turned and walked away. As she disappeared into the night, Richard watched, realizing she had become everything he once feared and everything he could never be free. That night, back in her hotel room, Emma wrote one last note in her journal. ** They laughed at my ending. But endings are just beginnings that the wrong people never get to see. **. She closed the book, smiled to herself, and for the first time in her life, didn't need anyone to see her win. She already knew she had. The morning light streamed gently through the curtains, painting golden patterns across Emma's studio. Canvases leaned against every wall, vivid, powerful, alive. Today marked exactly 2 years since the day her old life had ended, and her new one had begun. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. The same city that once laughed at her name now celebrated it. On her desk lay a letter from the museum director inviting her to host a permanent exhibition titled * From Silence to Strength, *. She smiled. This was it, the final chapter. Not of her pain, but of her transformation. Later that afternoon, she visited the museum one last time before the opening. A small crowd had already gathered, admiring the centerpiece of her collection, * Freedom Looks Like Me, *. She stood quietly behind them, listening. She must have been through hell to paint something like that, someone whispered. Maybe, another replied. Or maybe she just finally learned how to live. Emma turned away, tears soft in her eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. As she stepped outside, the wind lifted her hair, and she felt weightless. Somewhere in that breeze was every version of her that had ever hurt, healed, and risen again. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to the life that had broken her just enough to rebuild her stronger." Across town, Richard saw her face on a billboard, her name in bold letters beneath the words, * An artist who redefined survival, *. He smiled faintly, a mix of regret and respect. The world hadn't just remembered Emma, it had learned from her. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma stood on her balcony, heart steady, spirit free. The world had once laughed at her ending, but she had written a masterpiece instead. They laughed when she fell apart, but they didn't see what she was building in the dark. Emma's story reminds us that sometimes the world needs to break you so you can finally rebuild yourself stronger, freer, and unstoppable. If this story moved you, don't forget to like. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that strength is silent but powerful. And subscribe for more stories that make you feel, heal, and believe again. Because every ending they laugh at can still become your beginning.